U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar arrived in Taiwan on August the 9th for an official visit to the island. His trip is the first in 6 years by an American cabinet member and the highest level visit since 1979, when the U.S. established diplomatic ties with China. So what is the U.S. trying to gain by the visit? Is the Trump administration trying to provoke China before the election? What benefit does it bring to Taiwan? And what will Beijing do now? To talk about these issues, I'm joined today by Professor Shinding Li of the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University in Shanghai, and Ms. Joanna Lei, Managing Director of the Azar Management in Taipei. We'll also speak to Ian Bremmer, President of the Eurasia Group and Gazaro Media in New York, and James Andrew Lewis, Senior Vice President, Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yuan. Let me start with you, Mr. Bremmer. As the highest level visit by a U.S. cabinet official since 1979, what is the Trump administration trying to achieve with this visit?
You're right. It is high level. It is, of course, not sending the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State, which would be considered much more provocative. But I think that step, as well as the move towards sending surveillance drones, selling them to Taiwan, is an escalation. It is gratuitous in the sense that Taiwan, the Chinese government, has not provoked the United States on the Taiwan issue specifically over the course of the past months. But you have to put it in the context of the broader U.S.-China relationship. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that the United States right now is escalating with the Chinese in response to pretty much every area. You've seen, of course, the decision to ban TikTok and WeChat. You've seen the decision to put sanctions on Carrie Lam and other Hong Kong and Chinese officials by the United States. You've seen the blame for China for coronavirus, which President Trump refers to as the China flu and the Wuhan flu. I mean, Taiwan is actually a comparatively small piece of the deterioration of the relationship that we've seen between the United States and China. I would probably focus from the U.S. side on both the technology piece as well as the decision to sanction the Xinjiang state enterprise, by far the most important sanction the U.S. has put on. Those are probably the two most important steps that the Americans have taken vis-a-vis China over the past few months. And more will be coming as we get closer to the elections.
And Mr. Shen, how should we understand this piece of the puzzle as Ian just explained? Because if those viewers are not familiar with the history of cross-race relations, actually they have not been sending such a high-ranking cabinet minister to Taiwan for decades, and there was reason for that.
The reason is to get President Trump popular for votes. Because at this time, according to Pew polling, the U.S. public sympathy for China is at the lowest time for the last 15 years. Probably 3/4 of American people have unfavorable view of China. So if Trump would beat China, he probably would get some of these Americans who don't have positive view of China to vote for him. So this is closely related to his campaign politics.
Let's take a look at what some of the social media users have been talking about the visit of the Health and Human Service Secretary of the U.S. To Taiwan. Jerome Taylor replying said Douglas Paul, who headed the American Institute in Taiwan during George W. Bush's presidency, said that the Trump administration was still paying heed to China's red line, that no U.S. official handling national security visit Taiwan. So, Mr. Shen, do you think actually the U.S. has been practicing some restraint by not sending even higher-ranking officials, for example, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo or Vice President Pence to Taiwan?
In 1979, when the U.S. switched its official recognition of China from Taipei to Beijing, U.S. has not recognized the entity in Taiwan as having a statehood. It's an entity, but not a country, not to have a sovereignty. U.S. promised to the mainland side that it would only maintain unofficial relationship. So even for official relations, U.S. would disguise it as unofficial. And but this time, U.S. has totally reverted its principle by sending a serving secretary, a minister, to Taiwan in the name as secretary. And this secretary may have said some very serious political statement in Taiwan yesterday. And that indicated that the U.S. has officially and openly deviated for the one China principle it has verbally observed for the last 41 years. Very serious. But why not Pompeo or Esper? Because Trump wants to measure how he could get votes through playing the China card or Taiwan card. If he played too early, he may waste his potential votes. So he would hope China would beat him. So next month he would play another card, China would beat him. So at the time, a week before his election, that he would get the most attraction from the voters. So he may get some popularity. So this is a very crucial time how China would be firm by responding to him, also rational by playing our own policy in a righteous way, not only political right, but also tactically right.
But so far, the Chinese
our
government has not
calculation.
responded in any substantial measures.
I believe we will make, but as Wang Yi has stated, firmness and rationality. I think President George W.H. Bush used to send 150 F-16A/B to Taiwan. That was a big issue. And we said we would remember. And we remember, we retaliate, but also we would not, when U.S. destroy a bridge, we would beat the U.S. probably not by damaging another bridge. So how to respond appropriately, not to be played into his hand. That tests our wisdom.
And Joanna, do Taiwan people understand the interactions between the three sides, actually, mainland Taiwan and the U.S.? Do they see that Azar's visit as a political game, or do they see as a support for Taiwan's coronavirus containment efforts?
Well, let us talk about the stated purposes in both his statement before coming to Taiwan and the one this morning at 10 o'clock. In all two, they talked about joint efforts with Taiwan collaborating with the health and industries to combat COVID-19. Secondly, it did talk about U.S. support of his friends by saying that President Trump had signed a series of legislation related to Taiwan, and also their 2018 opening of AIT. Mr. Azar said this is a brick mortar commitment to our friends. So I think he does come in sending extremely strong political messages that Taiwan is a valued partner, that U.S. is showing strong support, and the third message that they are signaling is that there are other actions to come, including perhaps build new international coalition as an alternative to WHO, and or other potential steps to be taken by the United States, perhaps even before the November election. So all in all, it's seen as an extremely strong statement to support the current administration in Taiwan.
And do you think it is more likely that Taiwan will join the WHO with the support, possible support from the United States when itself is withdrawing from the Public Health Organization?
Well, that is exactly the problem. U.S. is withdrawing the WHO by also showing extremely strong accusation of how PRC didn't observe its rules. So in this morning's press conference, they did commend Taiwan's exemplary behavior towards sharing information, helping others to combat the COVID-19. And Tsai Ing-wen also stated that anybody, and the statement is that any concern, any political concern, should not take precedence over right to health, which she sort of positioned as a universal right, as a human right. So it is very possible that there will be a new coalition being formed, led by the United States, which is now not a part of WHO, and Taiwan will probably be invited to join this new coalition.
Ian, what kind of a coalition will it be? Because we have seen a series of bills passed by U.S. Congress, including the Taiwan Travel Act over the last 2 years, and the encouragement of high-level officials to visit Taiwan, the arms sales. Is the U.S. pushing the envelope, and how far can it go?
I don't think the U.S. is pushing the envelope on Taiwan. Again, the World Health Organization was a 1 or 2 day headline, and then it went away. The Azar visit and the focus on Taiwan's exceptional engagement on coronavirus is not making much news in the U.S. The headlines in the United States overwhelmingly are about China. They're about Beijing. They're about Hong Kong and the national security law and Jimmy Lai and his associates being arrested today. They're about the Uyghurs. They're about technology. The Phase 1 trade deal. Taiwan is maybe priority number 10. You may remember when President Trump first won his election, he caused quite a controversy by accepting a call of congratulations from the Taiwanese president, which of course no American president does. It's diplomatically inconsistent with the way the U.S. handles mainland China and Taiwanese relations. And Trump backed down very quickly. The Chinese media made it seem as if Trump was trying to actually change the status quo on Taiwan, and the Americans backed down. So I mean, I understand that Taiwan is a red line for China and for Beijing, and anything the Americans do about Taiwan gets oversized attention. But I would really focus on the fact that right now the U.S. is an election coming up in November. The country is incredibly divided. The only thing in foreign policy that the Republicans and Democrats agree on is a harder line policy on China. On China, not on Taiwan, but on China. Even Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, came out the other day over the weekend and said, I'm much tougher than Trump is on China. Joe Biden is trying to be tough on China. There is no one in the United States right now that's saying, oh, we really need a reset, we need a rapprochement. And while Taiwan is maybe the issue of fifth or sixth importance to the Americans, it will play, because on every issue that involves the relationship between these two countries right now, it is deteriorating, and I expect that is going to continue. The next 3 months are actually going to be unprecedentedly dangerous. You may have seen that the National Security Advisor to Trump just this weekend blamed China for direct intervention into the U.S. election, cyber attacks against American officials to try to skew the American election in ways that the Russians had in 2016. And of course, the Russians wanted Trump to win. According to the national intelligence estimate just released a few days ago, the Chinese don't want Trump to win. So again, the relationship is going to get a lot worse. I think that Taiwan will not be the focus.
Mr. Shen, I want you to respond to that. Maybe Taiwan is not that important considering what the U.S. has been doing. And at both sides of the aisle are competing to be more antagonistic against China. What should China do?
I would think the U.S. would continue to play the Taiwan card. The U.S. has many Taiwan cards. Taiwan Travel Act, Asian Security Reassurance Act, and Warship Mutual Bracing Act, etc. So if Trump wants to play more card on Taiwan, he has a card. But I agree with Mr. Brenner that he will be very unlikely to be able to succeed in building an international coalition. And other countries, American friends, in other places, in Tokyo, in Ottawa, and in EU, they would also follow America by sending their secretary and minister to Taiwan to partner on public health cooperation. They would work on it, but they would care how mainland would care, because they don't think Taiwan is a country deserving sovereignty, so they would be very cautious in not sending an serving official, probably ex-official or some unofficial. So I think Trump is not going to succeed in making a coalition, even if he wants to make. How China would respond? I think China would respond. China has sovereignty, China has equality, China is big, China has lots of resources, China has faith, China has principle, so why we don't respond? But the tricky thing is that how much to respond? To be 100% equality, or to be in certain commensurate with what is the U.S. done. I think we could do, sometimes we can do more, 120% versus 100. Sometimes we can do a little less, probably 70% versus 100%. Because we want to minimize the collateral damage. Anything, Trump would beat China, inevitably he would beat America itself. Anything China would respond to America in undercutting American interest, because the two countries have been heavily intertwined in terms of the interest. Anything China would beat the U.S. would inevitably beat China itself. Therefore, we have to protect China's own interest by having a measured response. So how to measure? I think this depends upon how those think tanks and President Trump's top national security advisor would perceive. But I do think China would do in a proper way, defending China's interests most and undermining China's interest in a collateral way least.
And James Lewis, a lot of people in China think that the Taiwan issue is a red line that cannot be crossed. But increasing number of Chinese think the Trump administration want to change the existing rules in handling Taiwan. Do you think Trump is simply trying to provoke Beijing, or is thinking strategic changing the Taiwan policy?
You know, I think that what people in China don't realize is that the relationship with the U.S. has changed irrevocably, and all the old understandings no longer hold. So we look at Taiwan, we look at Hong Kong, we look at other areas such as trade, and the deals that we had, the understandings that we've had since the opening of China under Deng, no longer are going to hold. And it's easy to misunderstand American politics if there is one point, as Ian Bremmer has said, that Americans agree on. It's that they no longer trust China and no longer think that the old arrangements will hold and make sense. So Taiwan is a symptom of the larger problem, not something in itself. It's not that Americans are sitting around thinking about how do we change Taiwan policy. It's that they're sitting around how do we make our policy with China more useful in a period when the two countries are entering into a confrontation. So see Taiwan as a symptom, and don't think of it as something to help in the election. I mean, American voters aren't sitting around saying what's going on in Taiwan. They look at other issues, and if there is one point that both Democrats and Republicans agree on, it's that we need to push back on China. This is part of it. You can always say the Trump administration could do things a little more smoothly or skillfully, but they clearly changed their mind about China when you look at TikTok, when you look at WeChat, when you look at all of the things that have happened in the last few months. There's a new attitude about China, and this Taiwan action is part of that.
But the problem is, although maybe America is rethinking strategically about its China policy, does America understand that provoking China on Taiwan is a very dangerous thing?
I think they do understand that, and I think that's why you've seen a measure of restraint. I mean, they didn't send the Secretary of Defense, but it is a signal to China that when you look at Hong Kong, when you look at the handling of COVID, when you look at the South China Sea, that there's no longer a tolerance for this kind of behavior. And, there's two sides to this equation. I mean, China wants the U.S. to respect its understandings on Taiwan. The U.S. has given up on expecting China to respect its understandings on trade or on espionage or on technology. So you see Taiwan as a symptom, and Americans realize there are articles now in the U.S. press saying, how likely is the military conflict with China? You didn't see them 2 or 3 years ago. And that has less to do with Trump and more to do with China. So yes, people realize it's dangerous. But there's a sense that it may be necessary. When you look at India, when you look at Japan, when you look at Australia, they are coming to a similar conclusion. Is confrontation with China necessary because of what we see as China's aggressive moves?
Mr. Shen, I wanted to respond to that. According to what Mr. Lewis said, Taiwan is just a symptom of the deteriorating relationship between China and the U.S. because the reading of each other has been becoming dramatically different.
Some American people may think China-U.S. rapprochement working together strategically in beating the then expansionist Soviet Union is a Cold War behavior. Now, Cold War has ended, so U.S. want to promote development, democracy, and security. U.S. used to pay great hope that China would eventually become a biggest version of Taiwan, to be more tolerant, and to open more markets for America. But Americans seem to be very much frustrated because these are not happening, and these are actually reversing. So America may think some American may think this is post-Cold War time, so China is less important. So let's play the Taiwan card to show American support to human rights and in order to squeeze China and to exert pressure on China, so China may make a concession in trade and market access, etc. And I think this is not rational, not a reasonable view. China can certainly do better by opening more markets, by improving and adjusting some of its foreign policy. For instance, Mr. Wang Yi said the South China Sea is the common ground of those countries living in this area, a regional country. So China's non-dashed line does not define that all places within Chinese side of non-dashed line belong to China. It's a regional sea, it's everybody's sea. So this is China's very friendly and also object to new assessment of its foreign policy. Good. But don't play Taiwan card. And China has a limit. If China would feel its sovereignty would be cut, China would lose this land. And that would make China strategically vulnerable. That would make a Chinese government, any Chinese government, politically vulnerable. No way. So I hope President Trump would play the card within certain limit. You can push the envelope, but not to push the envelope till the end, that eventually it would explode. So Madame Tsai Ing-wen and her colleague would announce the independence of Taiwan. That would make us to evoke the anti-secession law, and American to evoke Taiwan relation law, which would make China and the U.S. to have physical head-on collision. Why America would fight for Taiwan? Taiwan is not a part of U.S. territory. Taiwan is playing the U.S. irresponsibly. If the U.S. would give the wrong message through Secretary Azar and through more similar or even more high-handed approach, Taiwan may pick up a wrong message that eventually would push America to war, and China would be hurt, U.S. would be hurt. For what? Not for U.S. national security. For nonsense. So America need to educate those people ruling in Taiwan. Don't play America. To be cautious and to be reasonable. So I hope the U.S. All political force, like Democrats, would rein in Mr. Trump to make him not to be insane.
And Joanne, how do the Taiwan public react to Secretary Azar's visit? And is there any political debate about why Taiwan is caught in between, and what are the potential risks for choosing this kind of path?
Well, let me just add that all three previous speakers have underscored one thing, that there seemed to be a sea change in the fundamental U.S.-PRC relationship. And Azar's visit and all his public speeches underscore the same point. But I also do believe that the United States is showing very calculated, very measured, but highly restrained matter by showing and selecting public health, COVID-19, as the first step towards engagement. As such, there are literally no room for anybody to oppose to this kind of engagement, because there is a strong global pandemic. Taiwan did try to combat its own COVID-19 infection quite successfully, and Taiwan does have the ability to even to supply PPEs to the United States and the Southern Island nations. So this is, I think, an extremely well-calculated, chosen topic for discussion, but with the statement made by Azar, it also indicates that it's not only pushing the envelope, but also setting the table for something that might to come, even in the next month or so before November election. There might be other actions to come, because it is setting a table for the first step cooperation in health and public health, in providing PPEs, in developing vaccine and therapeutics and sharing information. That's the first step. There are other things, as indicated by them, that there are shared value, and Taiwan did say that we hope to be a greater partner in the Indo-Pacific region. And let me just add one thing. The language was very clear. They touted Taiwan as a model society for freedom and democracy. So it's a free and democratic society, and they're learning, showing admiration. This is a word that's used repeatedly by saying that they're showing admiration on how a free and democratic society can combat COVID-19. By contrast, they did say, without naming PRC, that authoritarian systems have its shortfalls. I think the contrast is very clear, and the political message is very clear also, but it is very calculated, it's highly restrained, it's setting the table for future actions to come, but the current action is very difficult to disagree with, because it is about life and death, it is about health.
All right, thank you very much. We're running out of time. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Mr. Shen. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Azar in Beijing. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.